Even though this talk is about Spring and the migration, I want to create a little foundation and give you an understanding for how Jakarta EE comes into play here. So how many here are Spring developers? Right. So that's all of you. So how many of you are Jakarta EE developers? Okay, 1, 2, maybe. So at the end of this talk, all of you Spring developers that raised your hand, you will also raise your hand when I ask for Jakarta EE developers. And you will get that by being here. So when we talk about Jakarta EE, as opposed to Spring, the Spring framework is a framework where in Jakarta EE, we're talking about specifications. And when we talk about specifications, the artifacts that we are producing when we create a specification is a human-readable document that describes a piece of technology. That's kind of the specification document. It's in a PDF or HTML on a web page. It's also an API artifact that we as developers use from Maven Central. And it's a test compatibility kit or a TCK that we use to test whether an implementation implements the specification. So with Spring, it's a framework. It doesn't have any implementations, right? We create this specification for Jakarta EE, and we have implementations that fulfills these specifications. And when one such implementation fulfills all the requirements of the specification and passes the TCK, it is a compatible implementation. And we can have multiple compatible implementations. It's not only one, it's multiple. But we need at least one open source one to call it a final specification to prove that it's actually implementable. And Jakarta EE10 is a lot of specification. All of these have their own TCKs and specification documents and APIs and all that we showed on the previous slide. In addition, the platform itself has all these artifacts. So Jakarta EE10 is a lot of specifications there. And I'll soon get into how this relates to Spring. But before I do that, I'll also show that if we peel away the more enterprisey flavors of specifications, we get to the Jakarta EE10 web profile, which is a subset of the platform, and it has specifications that is more for traditional web applications. If we peel away all the webby and UI things, we're left with a stack of specifications that is useful for creating microservices or headless services or whatever you call them, RESTful endpoints. And that's the Jakarta EE10 core profile. And core profile was new in Jakarta EE10. It's the first time we introduced a new profile since Java EE6, when web profile was introduced. So it has been a while since that. And the orange one at the bottom, CDI Lite, which is not an entire specification on its own, it's a subset of CDI, which is the context and dependency injection mechanisms in Jakarta EE, is kind of the key to this specification, because that one resolves all the dynamic features of CDI at compile time, so we can compile to native using GraalVM. So you can use Jakarta EE with GraalVM if it's a core profile implementation. Jakarta EE10 is based on Java SE11, which is old. We're on 22 now. The TCK runs with SE11 and 17. We have, so you can use 17 features if you want. We have implementations that have certified on 21, so you can use Java 21 with Jakarta EE10. I also have some running on 22, so it is possible to run. You just don't have the Java 21 features in the API, which you don't need really anyway. You can use it as an application developer. And that's because we test it on these versions. So, how is this relevant to Spring? Well, in order to answer that question, we actually have to back to the previous release of Jakarta EE, which was Jakarta EE9. And in that release, we did one thing, and one thing only, and that was we changed our namespace from javax to Jakarta. And we didn't do anything else because we wanted this migration to be as smooth as possible. If we had been developing the APIs here, you would be in an entirely different situation right now, because then you would have all these other kinds of possible errors, and not only associated with the namespace change. So the Spring builds on Jakarta EE. And that's why next time you're asked, am I a Jakarta EE developer? Even if you're using Spring, you are a Jakarta EE developer because you use more Jakarta EE technologies than you are aware of. And if nothing else convinced you, then this namespace change should have when you do the migration from Spring Boot 2 to Spring Boot 3, because that's the first thing you'll see when you do this migration. So let's look at some specifications. Anybody using Jakarta persistence? JPA, Hibernate, right? So if you're using Hibernate, you're using a Jakarta persistent because Hibernate ORM is an implementation of Jakarta persistence. So whatever version of Hibernate you pull into your Spring, or Spring pulls in for you don't really have to control over it, you get a version of Jakarta EE that may or may not be 9, 10, or 11. Right? So currently, Spring is baseline on Jakarta EE 9 specifications, but the Hibernate version that Spring Boot pulls in for you is based on Jakarta EE 10. So you're actually getting Jakarta EE 10 features in your Spring Boot 3 applications. And guess what? Hibernate 6.2 implements Jakarta EE 11. And that's probably just going to seamlessly come in the next version of Spring Boot, and you'll get Jakarta EE 11 in your application without you knowing it. And one thing we did in Jakarta EE 10 for Jakarta persistence 3.1 is to add UIDs as basic Java types. So that means that you can now do this kind of code in your Spring Boot applications, because that's the version of Hibernate you most likely have in your code base. In a couple of weeks or months, when you get Hibernate 6.2, we're deprecating Java util date. So if you're using that in your code, you're going to have to do some migration stuff again, because you have to go on the new datetime APIs. So that's something that's just going to come your way without you actually noticing until you get trouble in your application. That's how much Spring relies on Jakarta persistence. So bean validation, or Jakarta validation as we call it now. Anybody using validation in your code? You have any like at not null, at email, at some size or whatever? Yeah? That's from Jakarta validation. That's pulled in by Hibernate Validator, which is used by Spring Framework. So whatever we do in Jakarta validation, it's going to get your way as well. And what we're doing in Jakarta 11, which you will probably get sooner or later, is it's already implemented by Hibernate. It's support for Java records. So you get proper validation that is actually known to work. It does work today, but that's kind of just by accident. Now it's specified how it should work, and that it should work. So now it's guaranteed to work. Yes, I'll get to that in the code. So Jakarta Servlet. Anybody using servlets? Anybody using Spring Boot? Okay, have you noticed when you start up your Spring Boot application that it says starting servlet engine, starting Tomcat? You may switch your servlet engine to Undertow or Jetty or OpenLiberty or something else, but it's still a servlet engine. So you're using Jakarta Servlet, and you're actually heavily dependent on it. Spring Boot wouldn't even work without servlets. It's so tightly integrated. And as I said, it's easy the default is Tomcat, but you can switch to Jetty or Undertow or OpenLiberty or something else if you want to. That's fairly straightforward. And I could go through more of these, and I won't go through all of them, but let's just color these all blue. This is Jakarta 11. And then let's see, these are the ones that are impacting the Spring Framework. So it's about half of the specifications of Jakarta 11 is in some way or the other pulled in, or Spring Boot is dependent on it. So you'll be using it directly or indirectly in your code base. So that's why you are Jakarta EE developers when you're using Spring Boot. And so you see how much of an influence there is from Spring. Sorry? Yes, they are already in Spring Boot 3. Not the 11 versions, but the 10 versions or 9 versions. Sorry? We are Java util date. So we're replacing it with the datetime API in Jakarta Persistent 3.2, which will be implemented by Hibernate 6.2. because it's deprecated a long time ago. It's old, it's outdated. It's replaced by a newer, better API, the time-date API. So let's look at some code. Or first, let's just do a thought experiment. And this is I know it's kind of old school, but say that you want to do a new Spring app, and since I'm old school, I'm creating a war. You know, at start Spring.io, you can create a jar or a war. It's default to jar, but you can create a war as well. Anybody doing that today? Yeah, some of you. Yeah? And deploying it into Tomcat or some other application server. Yeah. So if I have a application, I want to create it on Tomcat, and I use the new Spring.io. I do a Spring Boot 3 application as a war, and in the basement, my IT guy has a Tomcat 9 running. And I say, hey, deploy this one. Is that going to work? So it will actually work. It will deploy. It will start up. There will be no errors whatsoever. But it probably won't do anything you think it will do. It probably won't do anything at all. Because it will be looking for a javax servlet. But with Spring Boot 3, you get a Jakarta.servlet. So that's the namespace thing. And in order for this to work, you have to be on Tomcat 10 or higher, which implements the Jakarta namespace. Otherwise, that Spring Boot 3 application won't work. You may get away with it if you use one of the other application server that has this kind of bytecode transformation feature built in that will take the javax namespace and automatically transform it for you and run it. I'll get to the transformation later in the demo, but you may get away with it. Otherwise, you should stay on a version that you know supports the Jakarta namespace. So let's go to the more usual scenario. And how many have done this migration from 2 to the 3? How many are going to or think they are or haven't done because they fear it? So about the same amount of people not doing it and doing it. So this is what we're going to focus on now. We're going to take this Spring Boot 2 application, and I'm going to move it over to Spring Boot 3. And that's fairly easy. So let's just do that. I have, first of all, I'll just run it and show what this application does. We'll look at the code first, and then I'll run it. So it's based on Spring Boot 2.7.8, which is sort of old. But still, it has a couple of dependencies and an in-memory database that I'm using just to show that I'm processing some data. Otherwise, it's nothing weird going on in the POM. The code itself is a simple Spring Boot application. It just has, start the Spring Boot. And the interesting part is this one. It's a REST controller that is using an account Spring Data repository to store accounts. It has a post endpoint that if you post a user into it, it will validate it, create an account, and get the email from that user, and store it in the database, and just print out some ID. So it's a very simple, just save it directly in the database. And also I have a get mapping where I can just list all the users I have in the database. So that's how it works. Let's run it to just verify that it actually does what we think it should do. So I'll just compile it there, just to so you know that I'm using the latest version. So in Java jar, let me see. Why don't I see it? Target. Why isn't it there? Sorry about this. Okay, clean package, not just a compile. It's me being on European time. I haven't woken up yet, but there we go. So I've packaged it as a jar because that's what we do these days. So I'll run it java-jar target boot jar. So it starts up, and you see it's Tomcat. So and it's JPA. Jakarta persistence. Right? So it starts fine. Let's. I'm on 22. Java version. Yeah, on 22. But it works with this 21 and 17. It's compiled to 17, so it works from 17 on. Let's do the HB get users just to see there are no users in my database, and then I'll do the post. I'll post the user with the email duke@dukes.com, and I'll just do there, and you can see red log statements. I'm a server-side developer, so red, that's good, right? So it says HTTP 200. So I have stored, it says user is valid. It's stored in the database, and I can now go and query that I have a user in my database. So everything looks good. Let's put a user that has an invalid email and see, oh, a bad request. It's not stored in the database, and I will have the one I started with. So that's the business logic. It's very simple. It's just validating the email and then storing it in the database, as you saw. So let's do the migration. And that should be very easy because we know the latest version is 3 to 4, I think. So let's just upgrade this to 3 to 4. And then look what happened. So now I get some compilation errors. And that's the first thing you'll see with the migration. So let's just jump back to the slides and see, yeah. So we got this namespace thing. I just upgraded the Spring version, but it pulls in the Jakarta 9 and above. And this is the first thing you'll experience when you do this stuff. And that's easy to fix. So I can use my IDE to fix this. So I can do this Java EE to Jakarta migration thingy. It's a refactoring step in IntelliJ. Other IDEs probably have similar things. And the good thing about this one, it will change everything in your code base, but it won't take the ones that aren't affected by the namespace change, because it's only the Jakarta specifications that change the namespace. There are still javax stuff in the JDK, like javax SQL, javax Swing. Anybody using Swing in your Spring application? Yeah. so it won't affect that stuff, neither namings, transactions and stuff. So it will just do whatever you need. You can also use tools like Open Rewrite, and there are lots of recipes for doing this stuff. And many of these recipes are kind of Spring recipes, because in this talk, I'll only talk about the Jakarta impacts on this migration. And when you're doing only that stuff, you can use the Jakarta recipes. You don't need the Spring recipes. You can use the Jakarta migration recipes for doing this this transition as well. But there are recipes for Spring and Spring Boot. You can also create your own recipes for your company if you want. So Open Rewrite is an awesome tool, but it's worth a talk on its own. You can also do it manually, which is what I'm doing here. So I'm updating the Spring version. If I have some Jakarta versions in my POM, I have to update those as well and fix the imports. So let's do this manual step. So in this case, it's only one. And it's fairly easy, so I'll just replace javax with Jakarta, and now it works. So that's good. That was easy. Let's compile it. So I'll compile it again, and what we see then is, oh, some tests failing, and we're writing tests. Yeah. So I usually don't. So this was a surprise, but it turns out that. When you generate the Spring Boot application, you get a test. And this test does nothing else but just load the context. And that fails, even though I fixed all compilation errors. So what's happening here? And what's the easiest way of fixing this? Comment out the test, right? Yeah? But we're not doing that because we're responsible developers. Let's see what's going on here. I actually have some dependencies in my application, and anybody having dependencies in your application? Some, yeah. So that can be tricky. So I have one dependency here. It's called dukedep, and let's look at dukedep. What that does. If I look at the code, I can kind of figure out that this account stuff comes from DukeDep. So that's where I have my Spring Data stuff. And luckily I have this DukeDep here in my code base. And I can see here it's an account class and it's a Spring Data credit repository called account repository. So they come from my dependency. And the problem with this one is that this dependency is also on Spring Boot 2. Right? So it's not only about the code base. You sometimes have some dependencies in your code if you're unlucky, but most of us are always. So we have this Spring Boot 2 application and we have this DukeDep dependency. And we want to move this one over to Spring Boot 3 with the dependency as well. So we probably have to do the same thing as we did with our code base. So this is on 2.7.8. Let's move this to 3.4. So obviously, any developer here would say, why should I go to 3.4? I can use 3.3. But just don't. Use the same version as you have in your application. Or if your company has decided on using one, use the same one. Because with Spring, even minor updates can do some break-in things. And I know that between the milestone, they changed the version or between the release candidate and the final version of Spring Boot 3, they changed the servlet from 5 to 6. So there may be stuff. So please do just keep them aligned. We can also see here that I have some other dependencies here, and that's the Jakarta persistence stuff, because this is actually a Jakarta persistence entity class with all the persistence stuff. And here I explicitly set those dependencies. I don't really need to, but sometimes your dependencies have it, and sometimes they don't. So what you need to do is use at least Jakarta EE 9 of these dependencies, and this is Jakarta EE 8 with the javax namespace. So I'm going to use persistence 3.1 here, which is the Jakarta EE 10 version that has the UID stuff, so we can look at that as well. And also validation, I'll use the 3.01, I think. So these versions can be hard to find, but if you go to jakarta.ee, you can find these versions, and you can probably uncomment and see what Spring brings in with their Spring Boot stuff, magic. It just happens for you, but sometimes you do it explicitly, like I do here. So now I've changed the POM, and all this stuff starts getting the same namespace thing. And these are way too many for me to change manually, right? So here I'll use the IDE I showed you. So you go to refactoring, and you have this migrate packages and classes, and it says Java EE to Jakarta EE. I know it's a very bad name. It should be Jakarta EE 8 to Jakarta EE 9, or Java EE 8 to Jakarta, but they named it Java EE to Jakarta EE, and that may be tricky. I mean, since you identify yourself as Spring developers, clicking on this is probably going to be hard for you, because as Spring developers, you hate Java EE, and you would feel really dirty by clicking on it, right? But here you just have to overcome that fear and think, we're all Jakarta EE developers. I can do this, and just try it out. You may try it out at home first, and then go to your work and do it in front of your colleagues. But please do try it, because this one will let you choose. In this case, I'll use in the DukeDep, and I'm doing the migration here, and you see it creates a nice little refactoring for me, and it just does it. I don't have to do search and replace or manually. So it just does it for me. So just try it out. Java EE isn't dangerous. It's actually a pretty cool technology, and Jakarta EE is even better. So I've done this. And since this is a dependency, I have to re-release this one, and I'll just bump the version number. You can use classifiers or any other advanced stuff, but I'll just bump it to 2. And when I've done that, I'm going to have to install it in my Maven repository. So I have this DukeDep. You can see I have version 1.0 in my Maven repository. So I'll just go ahead and Maven clean install the Duke dependency, and now I have version 2 in my Maven repository. And when I have Maven 2 in my repository, I can go into my main application here and change the dependency from 1 to 2. And recompile it. So I'll go here, clean package. And now it actually passes the tests. So now I got all the namespace stuff done, and so I can start the application again. And it starts up. And let's do our test. So first I'll just get, it's empty now because it's in memory. It's deleted every time I restart. So I'll do the post with the duke at dukes.com. And it's read, good. And let's see, there is a duke at dukes.com in the database. So let's go again and do the faulty duke with an invalid email. And, oh, this used to work, didn't it? So now it's read, which is very good in this case, since we log read when it's good. And you have crap in your database. Okay, what happened here? So it turns out that the user I have here that is doing the validation is coming from something called Duke's lib. And what's Duke's lib? Well, that is something, so I'll just relook what we did with the previous one. We took the source, we had the source code, so we just did the migration there over to 2.0, and we ran it. Everything went well. So we updated the Spring version, Jakarta EE versions, fixed the imports, and we repeated for our dependencies. So we're good so far. But we discovered that we have a Duke's lib in our code, and that's a transitive dependency. Anybody having transitive dependencies in our application? Yeah? So transitive dependencies are fun. And in this case, I have this Duke lib dependencies that is brought in by Duke dep. If I look at the code, you can see here in my Duke dep, I have this Duke lib dependency that it pulls in. But I don't have the source code for this one, and I need to get that one over to Spring Boot 3 as well, because it's probably on some javax namespace. If I look at the code, I can actually go to the user class here and see that if I open it up, you can see here that it has the javax validation email. So that could be a problem. It's not discovered. But for Spring Boot 3, it checks for validation. It's Hibernate validator that is on the Jakarta namespace. This is just an annotation. It just don't care about it. The interesting situation here is that for Duke dep, I had the source code, but for, sorry? Because it doesn't discover it because it looks for Jakarta validation constraints email and not for javax. It's brought in, but it's in the transitive dependency. So the Duke's lib has the transitive dependency that is javax validation, but I'm on Spring Boot 3 now, and it doesn't know about the javax namespace. It's not seen. There's email. It won't be discovered by compilation error because it's there. It's a transitive dependency. It's already compiled. If I had the source code, I could compile it and I would get the compilation error. But this is a transitive. It's just bytecode. Right? It's already compiled a long time ago, and there will be many reasons why you don't have the source code for this one, because it could be I created it in the 90s, I committed it into Subversion, and that was on a Windows computer under my desktop, and that Windows computer has burned. I don't have the source code anymore. Or I don't know how to use Subversion any longer because everybody's using Git now. Or it could be a library that I bought, and I only have the jar for it. I don't have the source code. That company is out of business. It doesn't exist anymore. Could be many reasons why you have a library that is transitively pulled in that isn't on the namespace. It could be a library, an open source library that is not maintained any longer, And so they have never moved it to the Jakarta namespace. And of course, you could just fork that open source library and fix it. But it could be a proprietary license that you're not allowed to do it. So it could be any weird reason why you don't have the source code. But luckily, there is a solution for this, and that's transformation. That would be up to the Spring Boot folks, because this is just a transitive dependency in your app that is pulled in. You can do scanning on your source code when you pull in the dependencies, and you can have a Maven plugin yourself, but that's up to you as an application developer. I mean, they could scan for any other vulnerabilities. You can use probably use some rules in some of the static analysis tools to find this stuff, but there's nothing automatically about it. It's just a namespace. I mean, it's nothing special about it. Yes? Is there any performance improvements between Spring Boot 2 and 3? Yes, I would think so. Yes, definitely. Yeah. Just by upping your Java version, it's a performance improvement. So there are some tools called for transformation, and these tools take your bytecode and transform it for you. So you don't have to have the source code. You can just do it on bytecode level. You can do your entire application on this way. I don't recommend doing it other than for testing, but for the transitive dependencies and the libraries that you don't have control over, that you want to move to the Jakarta namespace, you can do this transformation. You can even do this on other namespaces. If your company is acquired by a different company and you have to change the namespace of some bytecode, you can do this with these tools. The Eclipse Transformer is an open source tool at the Eclipse Foundation, and the Apache Tomcat migration tool is an open source tool at the Apache Foundation. So you can use any of these tools that do the same thing. By default, they will only change the namespace. Yeah, and no changes. So they will do it from, they will work fine from Jakarta EE 8 to 9 because that's only the namespace change. If you're moving if you have applications on older Java EE versions, it may not be compatible. It has to be on 8 at least. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, from 8 to 9 it wasn't, but from 9 to 10 there is. So I'll demo the Eclipse Transformer tool. Yeah. Yeah. So you can use Maven to see your dependency tree and scan for namespaces there, but it's kind of a thing, you can build it into your CI system. You can look at what classes are loaded when I load my application. It is, you can do it automatically, but you'd have to manually add it to your code base to actually do the scan, or use a tool that does the scan for you. Set it up in your Jenkins to do a scan of your code, for example, and find all those transitive dependencies and check what namespaces are they on when they're loaded. But it's kind of different from case to case, so there's no catch-all method for this. You could probably use DEFCON, yes. Yes. So any tool that will check whatever you drag in your code base. So these transformer tools, I've downloaded the Eclipse Transformer, and I have it here under my tools folder. It's just a jar, so I'll run it on this duke/lib dependency. And this duke/lib dependency is so this Duke dependency is in my Maven repository. There is also a plugin. It can be used as a Maven plugin, Gradle plugin, or some other plugins. You can use it as a directly integrated in Ubuntu if you're using that. Or you can use it as a client command line tool, as I'm using now. But there are different options. You just go to the website of the tool, which is on GitHub. It's called the Eclipse Transformer. So this is where you find documentation for the Eclipse Transformer. And you can download the jar if you want to use the command line tool, which I'm using here. So I'll go First, I just copy this 1.0 version of the duclib into my temp folder. So I'll just copy from my repository. You can if you have a company Nexus or something, or you probably can just pull it from there. But I'll just copy it over. So I have the duclib jar here, and then I'll run the transformer on it. And it's I've downloaded it to my local folder. It's called the Org Eclipse Transformer CLI 050. That's the latest version. And you see, I just have the duclib here as the input parameter. You can do all sorts of configuration for this, but the default is that it will take the javax to Jakarta namespace for you. So I'll just run this. And then you can see now that I have two files there. One that is called duclib and one that is called output duclib. So the Tomcat tooling will do exactly the same thing. So if I take these two and just compare these archives, you can see here in the original one, it has the javax validation constraints email, but in the output file, it has the Jakarta validation. So it's done the bytecode transformation for you. So of course you could decompile it and do that manually yourself with open rewrites or something, but sometimes you don't want to do that. It can be a lot of stuff. So you can just run this and it will take all your dependencies. You can batch them up. And you can do this in your build system or in command line once, like I've done here. So when I've done that, the next thing I'm going to do is to install it into my Maven repository so I can consume it from my application. And I use that with the Maven install file command. Install file. So I just take the newly created file, I put it in under the same group ID, artifact ID, but I give it a new version number. Here also I could use classifier if I wanted to, depending on whatever your flavor is. So it installs in my Maven repository. So now I have version 2.0 here. And when I have a version 2.0, I can go to the library that used this one, which was the Duke dependency, and I can up this version. So now I've upped it. So now it's using has a dependency on the duclib 2.0. But I also need to rebuild this one so I can consume it from my application. So I'll go to the Duke dep and I'll do the clean install here, reinstall it into my Nexus, and when I have the new version, I can go into my original app. It's already using the 2.0 here, you see. So now I can look at the user. You can see it comes from the 2.0 of the duclib. So now I have the Jakarta validation namespace here in my code. So the only thing I have to do here is to rebuild this one and restart it. So I'll just do just stop it, and then do a repackage it and restart it. So if I now go to my my test here and just see there are no users in the database, I'll do the good Duke. It's there. I do the not so good Duke, and now it says bad request. So now I've fixed it. So you have to go through all these steps to do the transitive dependencies and make them work for you. So if you have transitive dependencies in an application, you need to figure out a way to move them over as well. And the Eclipse Transformer or the Apache Tomcat migration tool is a good tool to do this bytecode transformation for you. You can do any namespace, but by default they will do the javax to Jakarta namespace for you. So sorry? So what's the difference between these two versions of Jakarta validation? There are no differences other than a namespace between version 8 or the one that is in Jakarta EE 9 and the one that is in Jakarta EE8. When you get to Jakarta EE10, there is still no changes. But when you get the Jakarta 11 version, it will also support records. It will do it in the old version as well, but it's guaranteed to do it. So it's all about what version is Hibernate dragging into your Spring Boot application, because you have literally not much control of it unless you go in and specify it yourself. So what I need to do is update the Spring version, update the Jakarta version. Yes, I'll get fix the imports, then repeat for all the dependency and transfer the libraries if necessary. Yes. So are there any scenarios where you shouldn't use the XF transformer? Yeah, so I wouldn't use it if I have the source code. I could use it just to test that it actually works and then do the changes in the source code myself. Otherwise, you can safely use it. There are no ways, no reason why you shouldn't. If there are the case where you don't have the source code. Yeah. 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 You could have, possibly. It's not a solution to it's not a silver bullet of this thing, but it will help a lot with these transitive dependencies. And if you had known about it, you could have tried it out at least and see if you had to upgrade. But usually it's better to stay on a upgraded, newly released version that supports the namespace rather than on an old version where you just did the namespace transformation. So if there is a newer version of the library that is supporting the API, you shouldn't use the transformer other than just test that it works and then upgrade. It also can be on the license of the library, and it depends also a little bit about how your application is. If you are creating a library that you are putting out in the open, and the library you're using is a proprietary thing, and it's not compatible with what you are distributing, you should be careful. If you're using it as an internal company application, you're probably fine anyway, but you shouldn't let it outside your company walls. But if you put your stuff out there under an open source license, you should make sure that all your dependencies are compatible with that license. In this talk, I'm talking about the Jakarta EE impact of it. So that's about the namespace change. There are also stuff between Spring Boot 2 and Spring Boot 3 that are Spring related. It's about the Spring security, for example. There were some incompatibilities there. But they on the Spring.io web pages, they have very good documentation and tutorials for how to cope with these things. There are also open rewrite recipes that will do it for you. So there are help to do. They've documented it fairly well. This talk is about the Jakarta stuff of it. There may be some additional migration steps that may be a little weirder and difficult to find, and that is. And it doesn't apply to all. And that is, if you have any properties prefixed with javax, and you may have some old code bases where you're using maybe javax caching strategy for Hibernate, that property needs to be renamed to Jakarta caching property in order to be picked up. So it also, the namespace change also applies to properties. You may also build these property keys dynamically or do reflection on some classes and do some reflection on javax classes. But that's kind of, you have to know your code base and just do whatever you need to do to fix it. So Java 22. So as you saw, I've been running on 22 all the way along. And there is really no cool stuff that applies to this demo in 22, but if you can run on a later version, you should always stay on the later version. So this works perfectly fine on Java 22, and we can even compile it to 22 if you want to. So you can. I'll also do the UID stuff. So you can see here it has the primary key of 1 if I add a user to the database. If I add a second one, it will get ID 2. So let's also change that to UIDs. But first, let's do two things at once. So it's on 17. You can go to 22 if you want to. You can also there are no reason why you shouldn't use 22 and stay on 21. There's no reason why you should only use the LTS versions, because the quality of the Java releases are just the same for all releases. It's just that they're not updated after 6 months, unless it's an LTS. But that's a commercial decision from the JVM vendors. So if you have a subscription or a support contract with somebody, you should do whatever they do, tell you to do. But if you are on the free versions of Java, you might as well be on 22. There's no reason to stay on 21, because it's just the same quality. You just have to upgrade when 23 comes. And one thing that is a little bit more kind of shaky is to use preview features. But you can use preview features of it as well. The only thing you do is to make sure that you compile it with enable preview. I wouldn't do this in production necessarily, but if you want to test out stuff, you can do this, and it may be a regular feature in your next version. So this can be kind of a thing you want to do locally. The first thing you'll see then is that you'll get some testing errors or problems when you start your Spring Boot, do your Spring Boot stuff, because the JUnit or Surefire that is pulled in there also have to have enable preview enabled. Otherwise, it won't work. So this is kind of the trick if you want to use and try out stuff. But let's not do previews just yet. Let's go to the account and say that I want to use UIDs here. Remember, this is a Jakarta 10 feature. So I'll change this one to UID, change this one to UID, and here UID. There, and the Spring data, not a long, but a UID. That's the only thing I need to change in this code base. Change from long to UID. And then, of course, I need to recompile my Duke dependency, because this was in the Duke dependency, right? And then I also need to repackage the actual application so it pulls in this dependency, and run it again. And now I can, when I post a new user here, you'll see it uses UIDs in your database. So this is how you can use Jakarta EE10 with Spring Boot, because it pulls it in automatically for you. All right. So let's move on. So yes.
You have to write plugins when they're talking to database, like Oracle. The way Oracle understands UID and Java understands UID.
No, it won't. It depends on your database. It's just a string in the database. So for this is all in the Jakarta persistence or the ORM mapper. So it will store it as a blob or string or whatever in the database. You don't really care about that when you're using the persistence, Jakarta persistence. You just see the code, use a UID, and you don't need to do what you needed to do before, is to do the UID to from and that kind of stuff. That's just done for you. So as you see, we're already rippling in Jakarta 10 features in Spring, and you're already using it even though you didn't know it. And that may trigger you a little bit to know about what's coming in 11. Because in July this year, we're going to release Jakarta 11. And how long do you think it will take until you have these features in your Spring Boot applications? It'll probably be like some months after summer. Like in August or September, I think you'll see Jakarta 11 features in your Spring Boot applications, because they like to stay on the latest version of Hibernate, for example, and Hibernate will pull it in. And they will update to Tomcat 11, and you'll have Serverless 6.1. So you'll get these things without you actually asking for it or knowing about it, just by upgrading your Spring versions, which you always should do. stay on the latest version, you'll get Jakarta 11 in your application. There won't be that incompatibilities like with Jakarta EE 9. No namespace changes. We're not doing that again. You can be safe. But there may be features that you want to use. And there's one feature that may cause you a little bit of incompatibilities, and that's the deprecation of Java util date in persistence. So it's only deprecated, so you will get a warning, but the next version will remove it. So you should use the Java datetime API, which is much newer, and it's been along for a very long time, so you should be there already. You know, the local date and local date time and local time and those kind of things, rather than using date and timestamp. So we're establishing this new release cadence of Jakarta EE to be 6 to 9 months after an LTS of Java, because we realize most people are staying on LTSs anyway. So Java 21 came out in September, so in July it's about 9 months after, and we will release Jakarta EE 11. We are adding a new specification in 11, which is called Jakarta Data. And Jakarta Data does the same thing as Spring Data does, plus a little more. And it's, what it does is standardize the repository pattern for data access. So it will be exactly the same as you will see for Spring Data. So I don't have any code for it here, but it will be exactly the same code. The only thing that will be different is the package import. So when you get Hibernate in your code base, if you have a Hibernate dependency there, it implements Jakarta Data as well as Spring Data is using Hibernate. So you may or may not see imports in your application if you don't pay attention and you want to use Spring Data, but it may be in your import statement you have Jakarta Data CRUD repository. So that's you just have to pay attention to what imports you are having, which version of it you got. But you can also migrate easily from Spring Data to Jakarta Data if you want to use it. We have some nifty features with the query language that Spring Data doesn't have. We're also adding a prospective specification. It's not there in the platform, but that doesn't matter for Spring anyway. And that's Jakarta NoSQL. And that is standardizing the integration with NoSQL database in the same way as Jakarta Persistence standardizes integration with SQL. So you can use MongoDB or something, and it plays very well with Spring, with Jakarta Data. So if you're using, for example, an implementation called Jakarta JNoSQL that implements Jakarta NoSQL and Jakarta Data, you can actually swap between a SQL database and for example, MongoDB if you want to. It will only be on the easy stuff, the advanced stuff. You have to do the regular way anyway. But it's a good start, and it's worth paying attention to. When I talk about you can swap easily, that's not entirely true. It's not easy. It depends on your application. If it's a simple application like the one I had here, it is simple. Some of the query things will map over. If you're using Jakarta Data for the query building, like find by name, ignore case method names, they will map automatically and create the Mongo queries rather than the SQL queries for you automatically. So you don't have to think about that. But if you've written specific SQL queries in your code, they won't map. But if you use the Jakarta Data query language to do it, it will. Not Spring JPA. It will integrate with Jakarta Persistent, which is Jakarta JPA, which is implemented on Hibernate, and that's where you can get both in your Spring application, because Hibernate brings both. Yeah.
In order to do that, what is the dependency that you have to add for that?
You probably don't have to add any dependencies because you will get it from Hibernate automatically. So we're also adding Jakarta RPC, which is a standalone specification. It's not a part of the platform, but we're starting to work with it. And this is an opportunity for you if you know gRPC well. You can help this project get going with this specification. So we want to do some standardization around Jakarta RPC and make it easier to use RPC with Java. We're not creating any new protocols or anything. We just make it easier to use with your Java applications. We are going to base Jakarta 11 on Java SE 17, which may seem a little defensive, but we're making sure that it works on 21 and above. So you can use Java 21 and higher in your apps if you like, because we're making sure that it's tested on both 17 and 21. But by doing this, we don't force you to upgrade. So if you're stuck on 17, you can still use Jakarta 11 APIs and implementations. But if you want to use 21, you can, but you don't have to. So to sum up, Jakarta 10 is the current platform. It will be replaced by Jakarta 11 fairly soon with the new Jakarta data specification. There are updates here and there to the specification. You can see persistence are getting an update to 3.2, and servlet is 6.1. Web validation is also a .1 release. So there are specifications here that are mapping to Spring that are getting updates. And if nothing else, I hope this talk made you aware that Jakarta is relevant to Spring, how Spring builds on top of it, because Spring builds on top of Jakarta EE. And remember this one, there are lots of these specifications that are more or less directly used by Jakarta EE in Spring. And if nothing else convinced you, then the namespace debacle over the last couple of years probably have done it. And remember, the transformers is a good tool for bytecode dependencies. You can always do the manual steps, but automate as much as possible. Try open rewrite, try the transformers, and have fun doing it. If you want to know more about Jakarta EE, it's jakarta.ee. We also have on the top of the page, there's a start button. So you can go to start jakarta.ee or click on that link, and you can get a starter and try it out. It'll be just like the Spring initializer. You can just generate a zip file and get going from there. You can read my blog about it. The demo is on my GitHub. It's called Jakarta EE Spring. You can get your blog on Jakarta blogs if you write a blog. You don't have to write about Jakarta. You can write about Spring if you want. And it's an aggregator. It's just go to that jakartablogs.ee and click add my blog, and you create a GitHub issue, and you can get your blog syndicated there. If you want to learn more about Jakarta EE, I have a course on LinkedIn. So if you have a LinkedIn learning subscription, you can go to this and get an overview of Jakarta EE 10. If you don't have a LinkedIn subscription, but you want to do it, or nobody's paying that for you, you want to, you can just ping me on LinkedIn, and I'll see if I can give you a free link for this course. And that's where join me on LinkedIn kind of comes in. We also have the Jakarta EE developer survey, which is relevant to Spring, as you see, because we want to know what do Java developers and server-side developers need, and what are we doing? Because maybe in Jakarta EE 12 we can add something that is really good for Spring developers as well. So do fill out this survey and help us go that path. And with that, I thank you very much for listening. I'm around all day, so feel free to come and talk to me. And thank you so much for listening.